Hello everyone, so today we're just going to continue with our pizza Python ordering program, and we're basically going to pull the pizza types from the database here. We're going to grab these 4 pizza types and we're going to connect to the database and fill this class that we made in the last video, and then populate this drop-down list right here with those objects. At least we're going to try to get that far in this video. I might split up into 2, but I think we should be able to do it. So just to kind of review, we've got my XAMPP running, Apache and MySQL are running. And what we're going to do is connect to the database. So what I'm going to do is create a DB connection, what's called a static class, essentially. And how we do that is we just right click on our project here. We're going to create a new file. And I'll just call this DB connection. Connection.py. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have to import a module that allows us to connect to a MySQL database. And one of those that we can use is called PyMySQL. So we're going to import PyMySQL. And of course, we haven't yet installed this yet on our package or our Python environment here, which is this one. So again, just as we've done before, we can open up an Anaconda prompt. And we're going to switch to this environment. So again, we can look at our environments by going conda info -- environments. And this will show us the environments we have on this machine. And we'll just let that load here. It should come up pretty quick. I don't know why my computer, there it is. And you can see here, we're using the Pi35 environment. If I have over here, you can see environments /Pi35. So we're going to want to activate our Pi35 environment. And then what we're going to do is install the package PyMySQL. So we can check to see if we have any of those packages installed at all by listing, by doing a conda list. And then you can see here in this package or this environment, we do not have PyMySQL. So we'll just do that, install that by going conda install PyMySQL. And it's going to fetch the package metadata. Great, so that was pretty quick. So we're going to install these ones. So yes. And just like that, what was this last one going to take a little bit? Let's see here. There it is. Nice. There we go. So now we've got the package. So I can just close out of conda list. And you can see down here it's indexing there. And now we should have this package, which is great. So we can make another class just like we did before. And we're going to call this class DB connection. Okay. And the only difference between this class and the class we made before is we're not going to have to by making it static, we're not going to need a constructor because we're never really going to instantiate this class. We're just going to sort of use the methods within this class. It's a nice way to make your code a little cleaner and to separate things and make things a little more modular. And in Python, we do this by just putting this, I can't remember what these are called, labels or names or annotations or something. Anyway, you just put the @ sign and then static method. And then underneath that, we're going to define a static method, and we're going to call it getConnection, because that's what this method is going to do. It's going to get the connection to the database for us. And then we're just going to put what's called the connection string. So I'm going to make a variable called conn for short for connection. And then we're going to use the PyMySQL package and call the method in there called connect. And then we're going to put a host. And we're going to set that equal to localhost because that's where our phpMyAdmin and MySQL is running. And the user, we'll just use the root user. And by default, the root user password is just blank. So we'll just leave that equal to an empty string. And then finally, the database that we want to connect to is called Pizza Python. So there it is. So there's our connection string. And after we've got the connection string, we're going to make a cursor, which I will make a variable called just short CUR. And from the connection string variable, we're going to get the cursor. And then we're going to take that cursor and execute the SQL query that we want to run against the table or against the database. So in this case, it's going to be, we're going to just select everything. So select star from, and then the table name, which in our case is pizza types. So just to kind of go over what I just did, we're connecting to the Pizza Python database, which if we look here is this database, Pizza Python. And then what we're going to do is connect, specifically we're going to query the pizza types data table, which is, so we're connected to this database and querying this table, and we're going to grab all of the data. So all 8 of these pieces of data in these 2 columns. So we're going to grab those, and we're going to want, what we're going to want to do is just to test to make sure we actually connect it to the database. What we're going to do is we're going to basically loop through the loop through the query, the data in the queries, and we can do that by just doing a for loop. So for row in the cursor, because this is essentially going to it's going to return something that's like a list. And then let's just print the row into the console here so we can see that we actually have the data, and then that's it. So it's probably best practice here to put a try and except around this block of code so that we catch any exceptions that are happening, and so our program doesn't just crash. So except, and I'll just catch everything exception as E, and then if we do have an exception, we'll just print the exception, and we can try to debug from there. So there it is. So what we're going to need to do then is we're going to actually need to call this method. Otherwise, this won't run until we call it. So what we can do over on the main, I'll just move this over here on the main file, is once we've basically called the database up here, or sorry, once we've called the GUI up, we can just run our static method in the DB connection class. So one thing we can do is we can define sort of an area, a method here that will be called write on construction of this class. And that's where we can sort of initialize all of our stuff. So I can call this this method like initialize. Let's go with just, let's go with, we can call it init, I guess, because it's the method that's going to run on init. You can call this really whatever you want. I'll call it init. And then what we will do inside of this is we're going to have to import now the file we just made, db connection. So we'll import db connection, and we'll just shorten it so we don't have to write that out all the time as db. So when you import a method, you can import it as whatever you're choosing, so that you don't have to type out this whole thing every single time. So in the init method, what we'll do just to test this out is we'll go db.dbConnection, because right now db is referring to this file, and we're going to access this class, this static class, and within that class we're going to get the method, and as you can see it's already populated for us the method getConnection. So we can just click that because this class has the static method getConnection, which is exactly what we want to do. So we're going to access this dbConnection static class and get that static method within it, which is going to return the connection. And what we'll do eventually is we'll just return the connection rather than actually running a query. But just to test to make sure we actually connect it to the database, we'll just we won't return the connection. We'll run this simple query here. So this method here won't run automatically because it's not being called anywhere. So what we'll do is we'll call it within the constructor when we're constructing the GUI object. So we will simply have to call self dot and then the method name init. And there we go. So this should basically, when we call the main method, it will create this class, it's to instantiate this class, turn it into a window object. And when it does so, it'll grab the GUI, and then it will also call this init method that we just made, connect to the database and run our query, and then print out the rows in our console. And if that happens, then we've obviously got a good connection to the database. So let's run this. And oh, looks like we got an error. So it says attribute error module DB connection has no attribute DB connection. So is there just a spelling mistake somewhere here? So we import DB connection as DB, DB dot DB connection dot get connection. Okay, so that looks good. Attribute error module DB connection has no attribute DB connection. So it's saying it has no attribute. Did I spell something wrong? Is this? I'm pretty sure I spelled that right. Let's see here. This should be this. Oh, no, I didn't spell it right, did I? What? Can I undo that? What was the issue there? Did you? I think I saw a change and now I can. Oh boy. You guys are probably thinking I'm crazy here. Let's. Oh, I think it was a capital C. Yeah. Gotta get the case sensitivity right there. So let's run this again. There we go. So as you can see now, we've got the 4 pizza types from the table, and this is successfully printed to the console. So we've actually connected to the database correctly. So all we have to do next then is essentially pull this data, and rather than printing it in the console, we want to print it into or put it into our object, make objects from our class with the pizza types class, and then store that or display that in the drop-down list. Okay, so what we'll do to get this going is we'll start by creating a new directory, and we'll call this directory, we'll call it a controller, because this controller will essentially have files which we control what happens with the data. It'll make more sense when we kind of get to it here. So we'll call it a pizza types controller. And okay, that's the, oh, sorry, are we making a directory? So we'll call this directory controllers. And then what we'll do is inside this new directory, we will make a file called pizza types controller.py. Okay. And here is where we will instantiate those objects. So, and that's why it's called a controller. It's sort of where you control what happens with the data. So we're going to delete this stuff here then. We're just going to basically eliminate all this stuff. I'm just going to cut it out so it saves to the clipboard, because we still will probably want it. And we're going to connect to the database. And actually here, I'm just going to undo here. And I'm actually going to grab the cursor as well, because we're going to want that as well. So I'm just going to cut that so it's saved to the clipboard. And all we'll do here, because we know it's connecting properly, is we'll return the connection. Okay, so once we've returned the connection, we can then basically retrieve this connection and do all kinds of queries with it in our controllers. So what we'll do is we'll move over to this controller here, and this is where we will instantiate the objects. So let's start by, let's see here. We're probably going to want to make another static class so that we can call this on the main page. So what we'll do is we'll go class, and we'll call this, I'm just going to call it the same thing as the file name, pizza types controller. And here we'll make another static method, and it will be called, let's say this one will be called get pizza types. because that's what we're going to be doing here. And I have to put the define for the method. And then we will try to get the connection. So that means we're going to have to import db connection, and I'll do it again as db, which means what we can do over here is we can essentially remove this from here because we won't be getting the connection there any longer. And then that means we can remove this as well. We can just keep our imports clean up there. And what we'll do then is we will run db.dbconnection.getConnection, and we'll return this because it's returning a connection into a variable called connection. Right, so that's great. So now with this connection, remember we had stored all of that stuff in the clipboard, so I can just paste that here now, and I'm going to just copy that over. But before I forget, let's close our try except exception as E, and then we will print any exceptions so we know how to debug. And then finally, so what this means is after we do all of this stuff, if there's no exception, or if there is an exception, no matter what, we're always going to run what's in the finally block. And what we always want to do at the end is close the connection. We always want to close the connection to the database. So that's how this finally block works. So even if like this something in here fails, we're going to run the finally block even if we run the except, or if this works fine, we're also going to run the finally block and close the connection either way. So in this case, we don't want to print the rows. Instead, we're going to want to instantiate our objects. So we need to import the class as well. So we have the class inside of a directory called models. So how we can extract that from there is we can say from models import pizza types. And I'm going to import that as PT, pizza types. And then as we loop through all of the data, we're going to not want to print it. We're going to want to instantiate these objects. So first, how do we instantiate a pizza type object? Well, we can use the naming convention of having a lowercase. So we can say pizza type, and this is going to be the object. And we're going to call pt dot pizza types. And we're going to run the constructor, and that's what's going to build this object. So if we remember, if we look here, there's two things here, the type ID and the name. And what we can do is we can just grab this and we'll copy it and we'll paste it right next to it here so that we know what order we have to do this in. So we have to grab the type ID and the name. So the row is going to be an array or a list of the data in the columns of that row. So let me just show you what I mean. So basically the first row, this is the first row, and it's going to be a list of these two pieces of data in the first row. So the type ID is going to be in row 1 and then position 0 in the index, right? 0 is how lists start. And then the pizza type is going to be 1. So 0 and 1 within the row, right? So what we need to do here is we'll say row 0 and row 1. And that is going to be the pizza type the type ID and the pizza name for this object. And then we'll keep doing that for each of the rows of data. And once we've made all of our pizza types, what we're going to want to do is append this to some kind of a list. So what we're going to want to do to make this list happen is at the top here, we can instantiate a empty list. So before we even make the connection, we can make a list and we can say list of pizza types. And we can just make that an empty list. And then down here, we can say list of pizza types dot append. And what we're going to append is the pizza type, right? Which is this object here. We're going to append each object to this list. So If this isn't making so much sense what my strategy is, I do have the video before, and I had a diagram that sort of explained what is going on here. But essentially, we're just taking all these objects and appending it to this list here, which is great. So then we probably will want to test this to make sure we actually are getting objects into this list. So after we have looped through and appended it all to the list, let's print the list of pizza types. And we should just see objects in memory and where they're stored. So this won't run unless we call it some over here. So what we'll do, instead of calling the DB connection, we'll call the pizza controller. So in order to do that, we have to import it. So we'll say from controllers, import pizza types controller. And I'm going to import that as PTC for pizza type controller. And I'll capitalize that. And then what we can do down here in our init method here is we'll take PTC dot pizza types controller, which is the class, dot the method, which is get pizza types. And that is going to call this method, which will hopefully print all of the objects that we've just put into this list into the console. So let's see if that works. So let's rerun our program. And it looks like it works. So we have, this is, you can see an array, and these are objects within the array, and this is where they're stored in the memory, I believe. Please correct me if I'm wrong on that. And we can see we have 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that's good. That means we have 4 objects and we had 4 pizzas. To make this a little more clear though, we don't have to just print the actual object and where it's stored in memory. If you remember, we made a get type ID and get name method so that we can extract the actual data that we've put in here. So if we, instead of just put print the whole list, we could print, let's say we target the first object, which is 0, right? That would be this object at this index. And then we can put dot get name right there. And then we will get the first name of the pizza. So let's rerun this. And there it is, cheese. And maybe to make this a little more clear, what we could do after running this is we could run another for loop for x in the list of pizza types. And what we can do is we can, instead of just printing 1, we can print all of them. So we can print x, because that would be, this is the objects within here, and we're going to call the getName method on each of those pizza type objects, and then we should see all 4 of the pizzas come up here. So if we rerun this, and you can see all 4 of them did indeed show up here, which is good. That means this is working. So we don't need to actually print this. What we want to do is return this list of pizza types instead of printing it, which means over on the main side where we're calling it, we are going to return a list of pizzas here. So we can say list of pizzas. It's going to equal whatever is returned from this method. So to prove that this is working, we should probably test it. So for x in list of pizzas, and we can just do exactly what we just did before. We can print x.getName. Okay, and that is going to now, instead of calling it on the controller side, we're going to call it on the main side. And let's see if that actually works or not. And it does, so that's good. So we've successfully returned the list from this method, from the controller method, into here. So again, we don't want to just print it all out into the console. We want to put it and add it to our drop-down list. So in order to do that, it's quite simple. We can just take whatever we named our drop-down list, and I can't actually remember what we named that. So what we'll do is go into Anaconda 3, then we're going to go into library, and then the bin. I'm going to scroll down to the designer.exe. We'll open that back up. And we will open a file this time. And open a file, just gotta find it here. I believe D drive tutorials, and then order a pizza. And here's that UI file. There it is, so we can see what we call this, and we call it CB pizza type. So I'm just going to copy this object name, and we'll go back here to our code, and we can go self.cb pizza types dot add items, and what we're going to do is we're going to add the list of pizzas. So to this combo box, we're going to add all the items that are in the list of pizzas. And sorry, this is actually not how we're going to do this. It's add item. So okay, so what we're going to do. So what we're going to do is we are going to add to the list of combo box, the list to the combo box by calling the add item method. And we're going to have to loop through this list of pizzas and add each of those items to the combo box. So for X in list of pizzas, we are going to add X, the object, and we're specifically going to add just the name, because we don't want to add the whole object, which is just the space in memory, right? We want to, and we don't want to put the type IDs there. We just want to put the name. So that will initialize this and add all of the names to the combo box. So if we rerun this, we'll see that all of these names are now indeed added to the drop-down list. And just to kind of show the power of the object-oriented programming, we could call our getTypeID method instead, and we could get all the type IDs there. So now we have a choice. So now we can go getTypeID, and as you can see, now when we run this, we have an error because assignment one has unnecessary type int. Oh yes, so it's just because this is an integer now, because it's numbers, so we just have to convert this to a string to actually get this to work. So we'll try this again, and now we see we have the type IDs. But what we want is the behavior we saw before. So I'm just going to remove the string, and we'll just get it back to get name. So perfect, so we've successfully connected to the database. We've made a controller that will instantiate our pizza objects, which we then return to the main file. And then we add all of those items to our combo box, and now we can see that it is populated. So in the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to basically select one of these pizzas, and with that type ID, we're going to query the database again to fill this table with the appropriate pizza toppings from that pizza. So thanks for all your support with the subscriptions and likes, and I'll see you in the next video.